My parents tried to cancel my apartment lease behind my back, but what they did not expect was that my landlord would call me first and expose everything. My name is Emily Carter, and I am 31 years old, living and working outside Chicago. I thought the hardest part of adulthood was building a stable life on your own. I was wrong, because sometimes the biggest challenge is protecting that life from the very people who believe they still control it. The morning my landlord called me asking why my parents were trying to cancel my apartment lease without my permission was the moment I realized my own family had decided to sabotage the life I worked so hard to build. My name is Emily Carter. I am 31 years old, and I work as a dental hygienist in a busy clinic outside Chicago. And everything I have in my life came from years of discipline, patience, and quietly pushing forward, even when people close to me believed I would eventually fail. Growing up, my parents believed control was the same thing as guidance, and independence was treated like disrespect. I was always the responsible daughter, the one who studied, the one who worked part-time jobs in high school, and the one who tried to avoid arguments, while my younger brother was allowed to make mistakes and still be comforted. When I graduated from college and decided to move to a different city for work, my parents acted as if I had abandoned them. Even though I still called every week and visited when I could, over time, I learned to keep parts of my life private because every decision I made seemed to trigger criticism. When I bought my first car, my mother warned me that financial independence makes daughters selfish. When I accepted a promotion at the clinic, my father said professional ambition ruins family values. So when I finally signed the lease for my own apartment last year, I did not even celebrate openly. I simply moved in quietly, bought secondhand furniture, and focused on building a stable, peaceful routine. Before I continue, I always wonder where people are listening from when they hear stories like this. So if you are listening right now, I would honestly love to know where you are watching from or what time it is in your country. Because when this happened to me, it felt like my world paused while everything outside kept moving normally. The apartment itself was small, but perfect for me. It had soft afternoon sunlight, wooden floors that creaked a little when I walked across them, and a balcony where I liked to sit after long shifts at the clinic, drinking tea and letting my mind slow down. After years of living under constant criticism, that quiet space felt like proof that I could take care of myself. My landlord, Mr. Harris, was a calm, older man who owned several buildings in the neighborhood, and he always treated tenants with respect. He handled repairs quickly and checked in occasionally to make sure everything in the building was running smoothly. For almost 8 months, my life felt balanced. Work was steady, my relationship with my parents was distant but manageable, and my evenings were peaceful. Until one Thursday afternoon when my phone rang while I was finishing paperwork at the clinic. The caller ID showed Mr. Harris, which was unusual because we rarely spoke unless something needed fixing. When I answered, he sounded confused rather than upset. He asked me gently if everything was all right and whether I had recently asked my parents to handle my housing arrangements for me. Those words made my chest tighten because I had never given anyone permission to discuss my lease. I asked him what he meant, and he explained that earlier that day, a couple identifying themselves as my parents had called his office insisting that I was financially irresponsible and emotionally unstable, and that they wanted to cancel my lease immediately before I caused damage to the property. Hearing that felt unreal, like someone had suddenly rewritten the story of my life while I wasn't looking. I told him clearly that I had never asked anyone to speak on my behalf and that I was fully capable of managing my own housing. Mr. Harris paused for a moment and then said something that changed everything. He said that that was exactly why he called me, because the story they told did not match the tenant he had known for months, and something about their urgency felt suspicious. When I hung up the phone, I sat there quietly, staring at the desk in front of me, realizing that the people who were supposed to support me had decided instead to interfere with the one place that finally felt safe and independent. And in that moment, I understood that this situation was not going to disappear quietly. Because when someone tries to take control of your home, they are not just interfering with your address, they are challenging your right to build your own life. And that realization was the beginning of a conflict I had avoided for years, but could no longer ignore. After I hung up the phone with my landlord, I sat quietly at the small desk in the back office of the dental clinic, trying to process what had just happened, because it did not feel like a normal misunderstanding. It felt planned and deliberate. And the more I thought about it, the more the situation began to make an uncomfortable kind of sense. My parents had never accepted that I was capable of living independently, and over the years, every step I took toward building my own life had been treated like a mistake waiting to happen. When I moved out, they warned me I would run out of money. When I bought furniture, they said I was wasting savings. When I explained that my job was stable, they insisted that young women should not trust employers too much because jobs disappear quickly and families are the only reliable support. At the time, I believed those comments were just their way of expressing worry. But sitting there, remembering the tone of my landlord during that phone call, I began to realize something different. My parents had not been expressing concern. They had been waiting for an opportunity to prove that my independence would fail, and when they did not see that failure happen naturally, they decided to create pressure themselves. Before I continue telling the rest of this story, I am always curious where people are listening from. So if you are hearing this right now, I would honestly love to know what country you are in or what time it is there. Because when this situation started unfolding, my sense of normal time completely disappeared. The rest of that afternoon at work passed slowly. I finished patient files, answered routine emails, and tried to act normal, but my mind kept replaying the conversation with Mr. Harris and wondering exactly what my parents had told him. When my shift finally ended, I drove home, feeling a strange mix of anger, confusion, and determination. Because this was no longer just a family disagreement. It was an attempt to interfere with a legal housing agreement that had my name on it. When I arrived at my apartment building, I saw the familiar brick walls, the small garden near the entrance, and the balcony that had become my quiet place to think. And the idea that someone else had tried to take control of that space made my chest tighten. I went upstairs, unlocked the door, and stood in the living room for a moment, reminding myself that the lease was legally mine and that no one could cancel it without my consent. Later that evening, Mr. Harris called again and explained in more detail what had happened. He said my parents had sounded very confident when they contacted him. They claimed that I was overwhelmed by adult responsibilities and that they were planning to move me back into their home immediately. They also suggested that if the lease continued, I might stop paying rent and damage the apartment, which he said immediately felt suspicious because in the months I had lived there, I had always paid rent early and kept the place clean. He told them that the lease was a binding contract and that he would need written authorization directly from me before discussing any changes. And that is when they became more aggressive, insisting that, as my parents, they had the right to make decisions for me. When he refused, they ended the call abruptly, and he decided to contact me directly because the entire conversation felt wrong. Hearing those details made something inside me settle into a clear understanding. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to take control of my housing and possibly force me back into their home where every decision in my life would once again be monitored, questioned, and criticized. I thanked Mr. Harris sincerely for calling me instead of believing them, and he assured me that my lease was secure and that he would not speak to anyone about my housing without my direct approval. When the call ended, I sat on the couch, thinking about the years I had spent trying to keep peace by avoiding confrontation. But now the conflict had arrived anyway, and this time it involved my independence, my home, and my future. And I realized that if I did not address it calmly and carefully, my parents might continue interfering in other parts of my life as well, which meant I needed to stop reacting emotionally and start thinking strategically about how to protect the life I had worked so hard to build. That night, after speaking with my landlord, I sat on the couch in my living room, looking around the apartment that I had slowly turned into my own peaceful space. And for the first time, I realized how fragile independence can feel when someone else decides they want to control it. My name is Emily Carter, and up until that week, I had spent most of my adult life trying to avoid conflict with my parents because every disagreement with them usually turned into emotional pressure, long lectures, and accusations that I was disrespectful or selfish. So over the years, I learned to stay quiet, change the subject, or simply allow their criticism to pass without reacting. But now something different had happened. They had moved beyond words and opinions and had stepped directly into my personal life, trying to dismantle something that legally belonged to me. And once that line was crossed, I understood that silence would only invite more interference. Before I continue telling the rest of what happened, I am always curious where people are listening from when they hear stories like this. So if you are watching right now, I would honestly like to know what country you are in or what time it is where you live, because when this situation unfolded, it felt like time slowed down in my world while everything outside continued normally. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, and instead of rushing to work, I sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook and started writing down everything that had happened. The phone call from my landlord, the explanation he gave me, and the way my parents had tried to convince him that I was incapable of managing my own life. Writing the details down helped me see the situation more clearly, because when problems stay only in your head, they often feel confusing and emotional. But when you place them on paper, they become facts, and facts are easier to respond to calmly. Later that day, I called Mr. Harris again and asked if he would be willing to explain exactly what my parents had said when they contacted him. He agreed and told me that they had spoken with confidence, saying they were deeply concerned about my financial stability and emotional well-being. They insisted that I had been struggling to handle rent payments and that they wanted to end the lease immediately before things escalated. Important had changed inside me, because for the first time, I stopped trying to soften the reality of what had happened. My parents had attempted to cancel my apartment lease without my knowledge, and the only reason it failed was because my landlord respected the contract and chose to call me instead of believing them blindly. That realization helped me understand that protecting my independence was not selfish. It was necessary. My name is Emily Carter, and up until that moment, I had spent years trying to balance respect for my parents with the desire to live my own life. But sometimes, balance becomes impossible when one side refuses to recognize boundaries. Before I continue, I am still curious where you are watching this story from, so if you are listening right now, tell me what country you are in or what time it is there. Because when this part of my life unfolded, it felt like the world around me continued normally, while I was quietly redefining what family meant to me. During the following week, I spoke with Mr. Harris once more and asked if there was any possibility that someone could legally interfere with my lease without my consent. He explained clearly that as long as I continued paying rent and following the terms of the agreement, no one else could cancel it on my behalf. He also added that if anyone attempted to contact him again regarding my tenancy, he would refer them directly to me and document the interaction. Hearing that gave me a strong sense of relief because it meant the foundation of my independence, my home, was secure. After that conversation, I decided to create a small but important change in how I handled communication with my parents. Instead of discussing details of my life freely, I began limiting what I shared. Our conversations became shorter, more neutral, and focused on general topics rather than personal decisions. At first, they seemed confused by the change. My mother asked why I sounded distant, and my father repeated that independence should not create separation. But I calmly explained that respect goes both ways, and that interfering with my housing had crossed a boundary that could not simply be ignored. Over time, the intensity of their pressure began to fade, perhaps because they realized that their attempt to regain control had actually strengthened my determination to maintain distance. Months passed, and my life gradually returned to the peaceful rhythm I had built before the incident. I continued working at the clinic, helping patients through long days, and returning home each evening to the apartment that had become a symbol of my independence. Sometimes, when I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights appear across the street, I would remember the moment my landlord called and how close my parents had come to disrupting everything I had built. But instead of feeling anger, I mostly felt gratitude. Gratitude that someone respected the truth enough to verify it, and gratitude that the situation forced me to establish boundaries I had avoided for years. If you listened to my story until the end, I would really like to know where you are watching from and what time it is in your country right now. And tell me honestly, what would you have done if your own parents tried to take control of your home? After everything that happened, I realized something important. Independence is not given to you, it is something you protect. If you listened to this story until the end, I would really like to know, where are you watching from and what time it is in your country right now? And tell me honestly, what would you have done if your own parents tried to take control of your home?